Hi, I'm Ines.
And this is Kathy.
And this is XX Will Travel, a podcast for independent women travelers. And today we have a very special guest who is going to talk to us about a very special woman in all our lives.
Someone very close to our hearts.
Yes. Laura Ingalls Wilder. That's not the guest, that's a special woman. But our guest is Wendy McClure.
Hi.
Hi. And we're delighted to have Wendy here, not only because she is super nice and delightful, but also because she is a writer and a children's book editor, and she is the author of a book called The Wilder Life, My Adventures in the Lost World of Little House on the Prairie. And we're going to delve into that book and her travels to research this book. But let me say hello, Wendy. Welcome.
Hello. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, we're glad to have you. And I recently completed a road trip through Missouri with the sole purpose of visiting the Laura Ingalls Wilder Museum in Mansfield, Missouri. So we will also be sharing some of those details.
And I just went to the American Writers Museum and saw an exhibit because I was green with envy over Kathy's travels. And we can talk about that I would say underwhelming experience later.
It's fine. You know.
It's fine. Yeah.
It's no homestead.
Right. No. But let's begin just by talking about our obsession with Laura Ingalls Wilder. Like, how did it begin for you?
I hadn't read the books in something like 30 years, and I was really kind of afraid to go back to the books, and I think that's because I'm a children's book editor. I was just afraid that these books I loved wouldn't be as good as I remembered, and also I know they're a little bit problematic, and they're, all kinds of things. Like, I read lots of bad historical fiction at my job, like in the manuscripts and stuff, and so I'm like, well, what if it's just like that? But then I went back and found myself reading Little House in the Big Woods again. I just had the copy that I actually had grown up reading. And then I'm like, oh my God, this is so great. And then my husband brought home, actually my boyfriend at the time, now my husband, but he brought home a box set of the books, the paperbacks. And so I'm like, oh, I guess I'll get around to them. But actually, I just started reading them one after another over the course of the summer. I think that was 2008. Mm-hmm. And so then I was just like, God, I really want to go to all these places, because as a kid, I knew the places were real, but I never really knew where they were. And I always hoped that, like, when I was traveling with my parents who would go camping a lot, that maybe we would just sort of accidentally pass by one,
Yeah.
But, we never did. And so suddenly I'm like, oh my God, I'm a grown up and I have money and, I have, I can rent cars, I can do things, I can do this. And so, I'm like, I want to do this and I want to write a book about it. So I got to actually, pitch the book, and they said, that's cool, go ahead and do it. And so then I got to spend most of 2009 traveling around and researching. It just kind of went from there.
Wow. What a dream.
Yeah.
Did you watch the TV show at all growing up?
It's funny, not really. Well, I figured this out actually researching the book, because I'm like, why didn't I watch the TV show? I sort of knew it existed, but not until after I was kind of past the books, I didn't really, think like, oh, it's this, it's from the books. And also I figured out, and this is again why the internet is so great, that it was in the same time slot as WKRP in Cincinnati.
Oh no!
Which my family watched. So of course we didn't watch Little House on the Prairie. So I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that explains why I never got around to seeing it. And so I think I remember as a kid, maybe one time like, okay, let me see what this is about. And it was just it was goofy episode about Mrs. Olsen starting a Kentucky Fried Chicken or something really weird like that. I'm like, I don't think this is the same thing, really,
I remember watching Little House, probably more in syndication, after school.
Yeah.
See, for me, the TV show just did not exist. When did it run? Was it in the late 70s, early 80s?
Yeah.
Maybe? Yeah, so, I came with my family to the States in 86. 2007.
Yeah, it would have been in syndication. But
yeah.
It would have been in syndication, and I think it was just probably never a hit in Peru. Who knows? It might never have been shown in Peru until cable came. So for me, it was strictly books.
I think concurrent with my TV viewing, my grandma gave me the box set of Little House books. I was probably 8 or 9, and inside there is a newspaper clipping because it is a grandma thing to do to send you newspaper clippings about the museum opening in Mansfield, Missouri. So I feel like my life has come full circle.
Yeah.
And I have come to have a sort of a new appreciation of the TV show because, I mean, part of the research I did for the book was like, well, I've got to watch the TV show. Yeah. And I read, like, Melissa Gilbert's bio and found out all kinds of facts. Like, they were the drinkinest cast and crew, apparently, ever. Michael Landon would have, like, a cup of wild turkey, like, on the set, all the time. And then they would go through, like, 3 cases of beer a day. It was crazy. And then Nellie Olson, Allison Arngrim, the actress who plays her memoir is awesome. Confessions of a Prairie Bitch. And so, and she is super cool. Watching it now, I know it doesn't really have anything to do with the, with the book series. Although the first one, like the pilot movie, that's kind of worth watching because it's, it's sort of faithful to the books, but it's kind of its own thing. And I kind of appreciate it in its own kind of like 70s retro, way too.
Question. Did you catch, like, it's not my favorite episode, it's the weirdest Little House episode involving the clown rapist.
What?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah, well, I heard about that. I'm like, well, I have to watch this.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm like, back up. Someone explained the plot of the clown rapist, although I guess it explains itself.
It's actually a mime rapist. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
I can't even begin to explain what it is, but no, because the very special episodes are super weird. There's the one where Albert, after a while they just start collecting kids.
Yes.
Ingalls family, they just extra kids.
Albert, Jenny, aka Shannon Doherty.
Yeah. And so Albert got addicted to morphine.
Yes.
And so then there was a super intense 2-part episode where he had to kick the habit.
And he foamed at the mouth.
Yeah. There was barfing. There was all kinds of stuff. The episode is called Sylvia, if you guys want to look, but it's also known as the mime rapist episode. I don't feel like I can even talk about it.
It's just weird.
Just look it up online.
Yeah. And then the plot twist at the end where you're like, ah! Look it up, watch it.
Okay.
Or what about the orangutan episode?
Yes! The orangutan episode.
Because, there was a time, I feel like in the late 70s, early 80s, where, orangutans were a thing.
Yeah, because do you remember?
They were just a sensation. Just an international sensation.
The series BJ and the Bear about a trucker and his orangutan sidekick, and then Lance Link, where it was orangutans with people's voices super, edited in, and they were a spy organization.
And Every Which Way But Loose.
Yes.
With Clint Eastwood.
Yes.
And his orangutan buddy. And so at one point they were just the producers were like, we gotta have an orangutan episode.
Everybody else is doing it.
Yeah.
Well, I actually, in your book, you even mention the series finale, which involves blowing up the entire house.
Blowing up Walnut?
Yeah. No, not the house. Sorry, the entire town.
The town of Walnut Grove.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Ines with real intensity here, more than I thought I would have. Yeah.
Which, I mean, honestly, it's made me want to watch the series now because it seems to have a real thing for the extravagant.
And then the one where Rose gets kidnapped, the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Where Rose gets kidnapped around Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway.
Moving on.
we could go on.
Yeah. So your research entailed Little House on the Prairie TV show, as well as reading the books and things like churning butter.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, I bought a butter churn and churned some butter, and it's pretty easy actually. You really don't need a churn. You could do it with some. Actually, I had some whipping cream. I should have brought some and put it in a jar. We could have just shaken it, and it's fun, you know.
Do you still do it on the regular?
There's kind of no point in doing it, actually, just because if you have just like regular like supermarket whipping cream and then you do it, then it's just going to taste like just like regular butter. So I mean, like I guess if you don't have butter and you happen to have whipping cream,
right?
Yeah,
it's a cool hack.
if you're in a butter emergency situation,
yeah. But it's like there's no there's no benefit really to sort of doing it yourself, unless you wanted to do something, I don't know, like mix in, I don't know, chives or something like that. But then you can also just do that with regular butter.
Right.
So,
yeah. Right.
I mean, I guess if you had really special cream or something, that you could do that, and it might be kind of worth it, you know. But
yeah. Or if you were French and you could sell it, like you could inflate the price and
right.
say it was French butter
or Amish or
Irish.
How long though did this whole journey take from you deciding to write this book, or I guess even the idea, and then finishing the manuscript with it?
Let's see. I think I pitched the book in, I think, fall of 2008, and then I started writing some stuff, and then I started traveling. I think the first trip I took was in March 2009, and Chris, I guess I keep on saying my husband, he was my boyfriend at the time, but we lived together. But we went to Pepin, Wisconsin, Little House in the Big Woods, and that's her birthplace. And then I did a solo trip in, I think, May, and that was to the museum in Mansfield, Missouri, where Laura Ingalls Wilder and her husband lived pretty much their whole adult life, and it's also where she wrote the books, and it's her house. That same trip, I took like a 2.5-hour drive to see the Little House on the Prairie site in Independence, Kansas. That was my one solo trip, I think, while I was working on the book. And then there was a big summer trip where Chris and I we drove to Walnut Grove, Minnesota, then to Smet, South Dakota. So those were on the banks of Plum Creek in Walnut Grove, also TV show, obviously. And then just Met, South Dakota is where I think like the last half of the book series takes place. So like it's where the long winter is, these happy golden years. It's the little town on the prairie.
Yeah, and that's actually where, was it Carrie and Grace ended up in South Dakota. That's where they lived their lives.
There are major stops in the whole Laura pilgrimage, but there's also like minor stops too. And there's some that you just, we might as well go there. And so one was Spring Green, Missouri, which is where like Laura and Almanzo lived for like a year after where Almanzo's parents lived. And so after things kind of went to hell, did you read the first 4 years?
Yes.
The house burns down and everything sucks.
Yes.
The kind of like, it's not really part of the series, but it's sort of like the last book, and it's when they get married and everything sucks.
And those locusts, those crazy locusts.
Yeah.
Is that
no? That's on the banks of Plum Creek.
Yes.
But they have hail. There's always something destroying the wheat.
Yeah. Right, coming from the sky.
Yeah. Like you should always be suspicious when they grow wheat and they're like, oh my god, this wheat looks really good. Because you're like, oh no, something's going to happen to the wheat.
Harbinger of disaster.
Yeah. So after everything went to hell, they actually went to Florida too.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
Did you go to Florida?
I didn't go to Florida, but there is actually now, there's a plaque there, There's a dude going around putting up plaques everywhere. Like everywhere where an Ingalls or Wilder family member spent more than, a month there, or like their birthplace, just everywhere. So we went there. And then the last stop on this big trip was also Burr Oak, Iowa, which is kind of like the lost little house site. It was where the family lived between the books on the banks of Plum Creek and by the shores of Silver Lake. She just kind of left this period of her life out of the books because it was kind of sad, and actually they weren't always going west, and they weren't always just sort of happy farmers. This was actually kind of this weird kind of like seedy time in their life where they had to like work on running a hotel, and they lived in this hotel. And so it's this old town in Burr Oak, Iowa, and so the hotel that they worked in is still there. So we went to see that too.
Which they kind of integrated that into the TV show too. Like
that's right. Yeah.
Didn't they run a hotel or work at a hotel? Or
that was in Mankato.
Yes.
Which is interesting. I understand why Laura Ingalls Wilder, the author, didn't include it, in the sense as you said, because it was seedy. It wasn't them moving forward. It would go against, this narrative she was creating. But me as an adult, I want to hear about the seedy hotel in
Yes.
Burr Oak, Iowa.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was super excited to visit it actually.
Yeah.
And actually that was really cool because I don't think in all, my experience of first being a kid and going to all these sort of historical sites with my parents, when you grow up in the Midwest, you see a lot of log cabins, and you see a lot of, like nice houses, but you sort of never really sort of see what like a hotel and what travel was like. And so I sort of realized it was really kind of hardcore to stay in one of these hotels. I mean, when you go through this house, it's a big house and everything looks kind of nice, but then they tell you that, they have these beds and people would sleep something like 5 or 6 to a bed and like across the bed, like not even like in bed. Right. And so that whole thing about like women not traveling alone, you realize is like, okay, that's not just like a weird thing. Like that was kind of like, yeah, I kind of get it now.
Yeah.
And so seeing that, and I don't know, that part was really cool because you saw it was this little kind of ghost town. This town where they had lived had been a big town on like the wagon trails, but then when the railroads came through, the railroad didn't go through the town, so it kind of dried up, and so it was kind of on hard times when they started running the hotel there, and so obviously like that was a great idea, but
Right.
Yeah, Pa was full of them, full of great ideas.
Kathy, where did you go on your pilgrimage?
It was for me and my friend Shannon. It was our birthdays, and our friend Crystal is in St. Louis. Shannon is from Nashville. So we always meet in St. Louis because it's equidistant between Nashville and Chicago. And so Shannon and I are real geeky and had wanted to go see this house in Mansfield, Missouri for a long time. And Krista is our laid-back friend who sits in the car and just goes where we take her. So we journeyed to Mansfield, Missouri, which is I think like 3.5 hours south of St. Louis. It is in the Ozarks. And Krista works at the St. Louis Art Museum, so she was very intrigued by museum-y stuff, like preservation techniques. And she said the museum actually like was really did a good job of preserving the stuff. And I guess Wendy had mentioned that is a new museum since you visited. Yeah, it's huge. It is a huge, impressive museum, and we spent hours there. We were the last ones to leave.
Were you the first to arrive too?
Almost. We walked in and it was a teenage girl behind the counter where we bought tickets reading On the Shores of Silver Lake. And so we were like, did they make her do that? We went crazy in the gift shop. And then there are 2 houses there. There's the Stone Cottage. And then there's Laura's house. Oh, yeah, and Mansfield is in the middle of nowhere. It is, like, in the middle of nowhere. It's very beautiful out there, and we actually ended up driving an hour and a half to stay. We went up further north to stay at Lake Ozark, which, not a lot going on there either. But very pretty, and then we ended up going to Jefferson City, which was really depressing because I love state capitals so much. And we toured the state capitol, which also has a lovely museum. It's a beautiful capitol, too, and learned, speaking of log cabins, that because St. Louis was founded by the French build their log cabins with all the planks vertically.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. So if you go down further south of Illinois, you will see, like, vertical planked log cabins. So that was my journey to Mansfield, and it was delightful, and I wish we could play the theme song, which we can't because of copyright issues.
Right, yeah.
Maybe you'll be treated to a rendition later.
So, of the locations you went to, Wendy, which ones did really make you feel like you were in Laura world, as you like to say it, and which ones made you feel like you were wasting your time?
Well, none of the places really felt like a waste of time. They all had their moments. There were all these points where it was like, yes, I feel it.
I know.
Yeah. And that was the thing. I mean, I was really, really surprised to how much a lot of these places still, they really haven't changed that much. Part of it's because, like you said, these places are kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's hard to really just pass by one.
Right,
you know,
right.
On the way to something else.
You
know?
have to make an effort to get to these places.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There is not a lot of danger of like a mall encroaching on, you know, these places. You really have to go there, and then the landscape is still really the same. You know, all the natural features are still there. So pretty much any place I went, you know, there you could just pick a time to sort of like look around and like, oh, yeah, you know, or find like a quiet moment and like, you know, a little replica cabin and be like, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, at the same time, there were, you know, it wasn't all great sometimes. I mean, I remember there was sort of bad weather when I went to Kansas, and it was a really long drive, and it was like kind of pouring down rain, and that one, I don't know if I felt it as much, because I think it's also because I know that book actually is the most sort of fictionalized of all the books, because it's not really based on her memories. That all happened when she was actually really, really young. So like I kind of know it's just sort of a book, and so I didn't really sort of feel as much the sense of like Laura World, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I read about this in the book a little bit when, like on our second day when we were in De Smet, South Dakota. Like, I loved it. I mean, there were times where, you know, you're looking around and it's like, yes, you know, and then, you know, the cabin is over here or the shanty is over here. And there's a great place where we were actually staying called Ingalls Homestead, where it's built on the original homestead land. And it's the closest thing to like a Laura Ingalls Wilder theme park, in the sense that you have wagon rides there, you've got a schoolhouse there, you can stay in these little sort of covered wagons, like these little sheep herder wagons, and you can camp there. And then they have like a really faithful looking replica of the shanty where they had their homestead. They also have like a real shanty from back in the day. That's still preserved. And then they have like a dugout. So they have all the stuff, you know. So it was really cool. And there was a point when we were camping out in the weird covered wagon thing where Chris was reading the books, and he was reading, I think, By the Shores of Silver Lake. And he was open, you know, to a spread in the book that's, you know, that shows where they're at the railroad camp, which is right where we were in South Dakota. And he was like, look at this. And there's this spread of, you know, illustrations by Garth Williams. And he just sort of like puts the book down, and it just looks like the same place, you know. And so it was like, oh my God, that's really cool.
It's magical.
Yeah. But then by the second day, there was just this weird feeling like, we actually left a little bit early, and I try to sort of go into like articulate why in the book, and I'm not even really sure, but it got to be just sort of, I think I had done everything I wanted to do, and I realized like I felt like I was just still like chasing a certain kind of experience, and I had this funny feeling, I'm like, I'm not going to get this. And after a while, I began to sort of feel like the rest of me that wasn't like a Laura fan wasn't really crazy about, you know, you know, the place. I'm like, I just want to be, you know, back in, you know, like a hotel room somewhere, or it wasn't even really necessarily like a comfort thing, but I'm like, this is not me. This is, I mean, I love this place, but I'm not Laura Ingalls Wilder. Like, I realized that I've reached my limit.
Yeah.
It's true. So when I was at the museum in Mansfield, I was super geeked over two things.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, we're going to...
One was that they had the slates that Laura and Mary wrote on. And I was always like, when I was a kid, I wanted a slate because of those books. And number two was Pa's Fiddle.
Yes.
That they only bring out once a year to play at the Laura Ingalls Wilder Festival.
Yeah.
I bought a t-shirt with Pa's Fiddle on it. So what were some of the things that you were excited to see in real life?
Oh, definitely the fiddle. Okay, so do they still have like so much stuff? Do they still have like Almanzo's like license plates? And they just had so much random stuff.
Yes.
Like all the stuff is basically in Mansfield.
Like Rose's pen and like minutia.
Yeah. Oh, I was super excited to see the surveyor's house, which is in De Smet. That's the house where they stay one winter. And when I was reading it as a kid, it sounded like, you know, the biggest house. It sounded like so amazing. And there's like this, you know, they open this door and there's this whole pantry full of stuff. And, you know, there's an upstairs. They hardly ever live any place where there's even an upstairs. And so I'm like, oh my God, it's huge. And then when you go, you realize it's actually really kind of small, but I was like, I still want to see it. The dugout site in Walnut Grove. Obviously, it caved in years ago, but you can still kind of see you can actually go to Plum Creek. You can wade in Plum Creek, and lots of people do. And then there's just a little sort of, they even have it sort of roped off so they know sort of what size it was. Just a little depression in the ground, and there's a big sign. And so everyone sort of goes over, and you're just looking at it's not even a pit. It's just, just this tiny little dip in the ground. But still, I'm like, oh, I have to see this.
The dugout. Come on.
That was, of all the kinds of houses that they describe in the series, the dugout is the one that most blew my mind as a kid. Because, am I understanding this correctly? This might be 8-year-old Ines taking things too literally. But was it like literally a dugout in the earth in the earth that they kind of caved into? Like, how do people live that way? I don't even know.
Yeah, it was built out of, I think there's some sod construction. You could actually make bricks out of sod. Okay. But then a lot of it was actually just digging into the ground and just sort of cutting out of space. And so, I guess it was because it was warm, and then if you're like out in the prairie and there aren't a lot of trees, it's kind of like your best bet when you're just starting out. And actually what was really cool in Minnesota, right by the site in Walnut Grove, maybe about a half hour away, there was a place where you could go see a sod house and a dugout. And it was just these folks who had a farm, and they were just kind of hobbyists, and they found an old sod cutter. They're like, hey, let's build this thing. And apparently years ago, you used to be able to stay in the sod house.
What?
It was like a B&B thing. I know. And I'm like, But I guess that they were saying it didn't really work out because, if you stayed there, but then you'd have tourists going through, it was kind of awkward because, you'd be like waking up in the morning. And, hello. Yeah. But it was super cool to see. And then the sod house was super cute. It was kind of like fairy tale cute, But then the dugout was kind of grim.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a drawing, and I'm not sure. I think it might have been Laura that did it. A drawing in the Mansfield Museum. They talk about like ephemera, and it's a drawing of trees because Grace had lived on the prairie so long she did not know what a tree looked like.
Yeah.
So Laura had to draw one for her.
Oh God, I forgot that was in the museum.
Yeah. We were there a long time.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I really wanted to talk to both of you about is, as you guys have mentioned, these are, tiny towns kind of lost in the middle of nowhere, and not really places that most people would venture to because they wouldn't really have a reason, which also means that you probably are talking to people that live in those locations or that travel to those locations that I don't know, I guess I'm just saying, like, what kind of people are attracted to these places or what kind of people live in these places? I guess in this year of our Lord 2017, which has been crazy. Like, what have you guys discovered about the U.S. by traveling to places like these, and also, about by talking to people who live in places like these?
At least in my experience, it was a lot of grandparents and grandkids who would be like, oh, I came here when I was a little kid, and now I would like to take my grandkid. I talked to one of the grandmothers and her 9-year-old granddaughter, and they live in Springfield, which is a bigger town than Mansfield, and they made the trek. And in Laura's living room, there is a big, beautiful portrait of Rose, who lived in New York. Like, Rose was very worldly. Yeah. I did a whole presentation on Rose.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she traveled all over the world. Right before she died, she was a war reporter in Vietnam. She's crazy where she came from. Anyway, there's a big portrait of Rose, and the grandma was like, hey, I would really like to know more about this lady. And I turned around and I was like, well, let me tell you, ma'am. And I was talking about all this stuff, and Rose actually wrote a book that became the foundation of libertarianism. And this man was walking by, another grandpa with his grandkids, and he said, he was like, oh, Rose, libertarianism, I guess I won't hold that against her. And I was like, that's weird, because I expected everyone here to be very conservative and think along the lines of libertarianism. And then I was like, yeah, okay. And later, there are 2 houses there. We were in the second house, and he came back to find me. Taps me on the shoulder, and he had his phone, and it's open to a definition of libertarianism. And he goes, well, that's conservative. I can stand behind that. She wasn't so bad after all. And that is when I put on my best smile, and I said, oh, and turned around and walked away. Because it's just such a harmonious experience. I was like, I don't want to wreck it.
Right,
So, so those are my experience. I can't speak to people that live there. I just think they're like small town folks, like any small town you come to in the U.S. They just happen to live in the middle of Laura land, and Laura was also conservative. Laura was really conservative. She did not like the New Deal. She felt like, she felt like Franklin Roosevelt let them down. And she and Almanzo they had a super hard life. Like, they were pretty much broke until Rose kind of got her to write down her stories and got them published and marketed. So it's a conservative region. Let's leave it at that.
Well, it's my understanding with Mansfield too that the locals were really, and maybe still are to this day, who knows, like kind of conflicted about Rose, because Rose was sort of, she was the one who left the small town. She hated small town life. And she's like, I can't wait to get away from here. And so she, traveled all over the place. But then she came home for a while too. And so they were sort of like, I don't know about her and her big town ways. And so there was, I think there was definitely like lots of gossip and stuff. So was there, at the museum, was there a big section devoted to Rose though?
There was not. There was her portrait, and there was her high school diploma, because she actually went to New Orleans to graduate high school, because high school stopped, I think maybe at 8th or 9th grade. And Rose went to New Orleans to live with Almanzo's sister, Aunt Eliza.
What?
Oh, yeah.
To go graduate high school. And I was like, Aunt Eliza went to New Orleans. And she got divorced. So, like, I can't imagine that endeared her.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. She was a divorced lady. And then she also would have some of her big city friends. One of whom, might have been maybe more than just a friend. Mm-hmm. And maybe she also had a thing with a lady in town. There's all kinds of speculation.
Yeah. So Rose got the heck out of Dodge, which I could see would ingrain all. And she went to like places like, she went to Russia, she went to Moscow to see how communism was, and decided she didn't like it. I don't know. She just was ahead of her time in many ways.
Well, it's interesting that there's not as much about Rose in the museum now, because when I went and saw the old version of the museum, there was kind of a section devoted to Rose, and it had like a lot of her books. It had her typewriters. I think it had like her desk.
Yes, that's still there.
Oh, that is still there? Okay. But it was so funny because people would, you had lots of families going to see the museums, and actually all the places I went, lots and lots of families with kids. And then they would go over to the Rose section, and they would be kind of confused. They're like, oh, here's a typewriter. Like, they sort of didn't know what to do. And a lot of people actually sort of don't know what to do with Rose in the whole Laura thing, just because she has such a weird sort of disputed role as, she was really like a collaborator on the books. I mean, Laura couldn't have written the books without her, but also Rose couldn't have written the books on her own. So, I mean...
Right. And Rose had the publishing connections and stuff like that, but...
Yeah.
So, and then there was a lot of tension between them, too, between Laura and Rose when they were writing the books.
Well, and the whole thing with when you go to Mansfield, so there's 2 houses. There's the big farmhouse that Laura and Almanzo built by themselves by hand, and it's kind of arts and craftsy. It's super cool, and everything is also kind of like scaled to Laura, like the kitchen.
It's tiny.
Yeah. She was a wee lady, and actually Almanzo was kind of short too.
But hot.
I know.
Pictures.
I think what was Laura was like 4'11",
something like
something?
that.
And Almanzo was not much taller than she was.
So then the Rock House, this other house, which is built from a Sears blueprint. Like, when Rose moved home, she was like, she was like, Mom and Dad, I'm going to build you a nice house. And they're like, well, we have this house that we built. They're like, no. She's like, no, I'm going to build you a really nice house. And, you guys are going to be grateful. And she always had this feeling that weird sense of obligation to her parents, even though she also like resented it too.
Yeah.
Which was so weird. And so she had this house built. And they're just like, okay, Mom and Dad, here's the house. And they're like, thanks.
And then Rose always also had crazy ideas like electricity and indoor plumbing, too.
What? Oh, yeah.
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 Those big city ways.
I know, yeah.
The devil's work, I tell you.
Yeah. But I found out while doing the tour there, they're like, well, it had a nice bathroom, but Almanzo always still preferred the outhouse.
Yeah.
So,
And they actually... The stone cottage was the one with electricity and plumbing, and Laura and Almanzo lived there for a while, but then they went back.
because then Rose and all her weird sort of city friends were living in the farmhouse, and I think the locals. That's I think also why the locals like kind of resented her too, But and I guess they would have like cocktail parties there, and which sounds fine to me.
Right. Exactly, and the cottage, the farmhouse, is like. Still in great shape. In fact, my friend Krista, who's the museum conservator, made some comments about 3,000 people a summer walking on original linoleum.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so...
That's a question for the both of you. I mean, was your friend Krista the one who wasn't too into Laura Ingalls, right? And you brought along Chris, who I'm assuming wasn't the biggest Laura Ingalls Wilder connoisseur until he met you.
Right, yeah.
So how did they approach this, or what did they think about all these Laura Ingalls Wilder travels?
Well, Chris, actually, he read the books, or like he started reading the books like for the sake of going, which was really cool, and I'm really, really grateful for that. So it was kind of cool to get his perspective of that. And I mean, mostly he was going to be supportive, but yeah, it was sort of interesting because he, he was new to the books. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think.
Yeah.
It was a while ago.
Yeah.
Krista really liked the museum aspect. And my friend Shannon and I are like, we won you over, right? And she was like, I had a good time.
Yeah. Well, I think it really does. Those books are not too hard to read. So I think if you drag someone along, you can really... I think it really does help to read the books.
Yes.
And, I mean, if someone hasn't read the books, fine. I wanted to go back a little bit to talking about the people that I saw on the various trips, because it was a lot of families with kids, and also obviously a lot of small towns. But there were like interesting things that I hadn't expected, especially with Walnut Grove, Minnesota, because that's a surprisingly diverse community. They have like an Asian grocery store there, and they had a big influx of Hmong immigrants from Asia. And, that was a big thing in Minnesota in the 80s and 90s. And then some families eventually started moving out to Walnut Grove, and it wound up being kind of a cool thing because Walnut Grove was kind of on the verge of sort of almost dying. Like their schools were going to shut down because the population was so low and kids were going to have to be bused up other places. But then this influx kept the schools open, and now they're, just kind of part of the community. And when I went to the pageant festival, when we did our big sort of summer trip, it was during pageant season, which is both Walnut Grove and De Smet would have these weekend nightly pageants where they put on sort of a big production of something from the books. And Walnut Grove's is like super cool, and they've got pyrotechnics and like live animals and stuff like that. And so it's a big deal when they have these pageants. So they have these kind of weekend festivals. Mm-hmm. And so we were there for one of these, and you could get like sesame balls and bubble tea and other things there. I'm like, hey, this is really kind of good food, and and the cast of the pageant was really diverse, and it was also, that one was also really cool too, because they realized it's actually a part of their town's history. So the pageant, the script of the pageant, they kind of expanded on the original like on the banks of Plum Creek story, and they included like families that had been like families that had lived in the town at the time and that had been friends with the Ingalls family. And so when you go through the program, they would list all the different families who lived there and what happened to them. And they were always doing things like falling down wells and being struck by lightning and, stuff like that. But it was still like, here we're honoring these real people who lived in this town, like 150 years ago. And so that was really cool.
Yeah.
But it's definitely heartland stuff. And, there were some times we're like, oh my God, this is like the whitest thing ever, that we're doing. But actually it sort of wasn't. There were, like I said, in the cast they had lots of kids in the cast. And so they had people of color and Hmong kids. And so that was, and everyone likes to dress up and wear the sunbonnets and
yes, for sure.
Which was interesting because I actually posted a picture. We were talking about this before. I posted a picture on our Instagram from the trip, and we have a really diverse audience, and we love it that way. And I was curious as the type of feedback we'd get from me doing a Laura Ingalls road trip, which it's very, very white, as you said.
Yeah.
But we had all types of women commenting about how they loved the book. And maybe part of it is because there wasn't a lot for little girls to read back then. But that was really interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about why I gravitated so much to the books when I was a kid because, well, one, I read everything in sight. And so I would see all these, classmates of mine reading the books. But let's face it, like, as this, like, Peruvian little girl in the States, it's not like my parents were pushing it on me. I had no idea what prairie life was like, and I really, really took to them. And honestly, I think for me, it was the fact that Laura was a little girl who always kept moving, which was my experience. Mm-hmm. I was always moving, and at the time, that was really strange to find other kids that moved around a lot. Like, usually everyone stayed in their place. And I think that's what I got out of it, because even though I did like hearing the descriptions, of some prairie stuff, I've always also been a very like city person, even as a kid, which is why my favorite books were the ones where like they're more closer to civilization, like Little Town on the Prairie and On the Shores of Silver Lake. Like the earlier ones I could kind of do without because they're so isolated. But it's like once they have townsfolk, I'm like, I'm here. Yeah. But I think for me it was that, because it's like, oh my God, finally, there's like a girl in a book that just moves every 3 years like I do, Yeah. And I think maybe that sense of displacement is what like some of these like, well, I don't know. Well, the Hmong community has a special connection, the Hmong community of Walnut Grove. But maybe that's why there's more of a diverse fan base than we'd expect. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Mm-hmm. That's my perspective.
Yeah, well, I feel like they're a great combination of safety and security because they were such a tight family unit, but at the same time they went through stuff, and then there was also plenty of adventure for a girl, and you never felt like it was compromised anyway. You were never like, oh, if only she was a boy, It was just sort of like, oh, she was a girl, and she got dirty, and she rolled off haystacks and poked badgers with sticks and almost drowned in the tree, and the creek and, all kinds of things.
Tossed around the pig bladder.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you have a passage in your book that, and you can explain it, probably better than I can, but where you say that you don't believe Laura was a tomboy. Yeah. That she just happened to be a girl living in her circumstances, which I thought was really spot on, in the sense that this idea, I think this dichotomy we have where you're either a girly girl or a tomboy leaves like so many women out, because most women I know were a little tomboyish in some things and a little girly girl in others and whatever, and I think with Laura you kind of see that, right?
Yeah, I didn't get the sense that she wanted to be a boy or anything like that. I mean, I don't know, that's not necessarily what being a tomboy is all about, but I liked it because she got to wear long dresses, but she also got to get grubby.
Right. And the sense of frustration, like on Sundays when all you could do was embroider. Like she did not fit into that mold, and I was like, me neither. And the only book I didn't read in the series is the one that has the uncracked spine in my box set is Farmer Boy.
Farmer Boy. Oh, okay. So you are a. I feel like in my survey of Laura fans, there are Almanzonians and non-Almanzonians. So you are a non-Almanzonian.
I guess so. I like the romance. Like I loved when they were courting and when they would go on the sleigh with their friends, including Cap Garland, who is also very handsome in it.
Oh yeah, really?
He's pretty dreamy.
I'm gonna need pics.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, because Farmer Boy it's such a different book, and so but there are lots of people who love Farmer Boy, and Farmer Boy is kind of a relief when you're reading the series because. Especially if you actually sort of read it in order, I think it comes like the third or fourth book or something, because it's a break from all the like just eating like corn dodgers with molasses that the Ingalls,
Johnny cakes,
the Ingalls family does, and then they live. It's his family in upstate New York and his childhood, and they live really comfortably, and that's also where all the great food is.
Oh.
Yes.
So there is this book called the Little House Cookbook that came out in the 70s, and actually one of the things that one of the great benefits of having written this book is I got to meet Barbara Walker, who wrote the Little House Cookbook.
Wow.
I know, and I'm like super excited. She's super cool. But that cookbook would not be anything at all without Farmer Boy. Like all the good recipes, like apples and onions, and all the good like sort of poultry recipes. Like it would be really, really a sad cookbook if it was just the Ingalls family foods. Then there's so many descriptions of like Almanzo just eating like huge stacks of pancakes and there's a description where he says something like he could taste the food in every corner of his mouth. Oh. I'm like, how can you do that? I tried doing that. And actually, my very last sort of official sort of researchy trip was to upstate New York to see the Farmer Boy house. So we had been, we had both like met up in New York City. And then we flew to Burlington, Vermont, which is a gorgeous little town. Yeah. And then we drove from there. It was like maybe something like 2 hours to the Farmer Boy site. So it's really like kind of not in the same sort of realm at all. It's kind of like off the beaten path. But of all the home sites, it's the only one from the books that's still standing on its original foundation.
Huh.
And also it's, I think, probably like the most well-preserved of all the sites because they finally actually bought the house in the like late 70s or early 80s, and they were able to really do like a proper like archaeological study. And it's a nice house. It's like this really nice farmhouse. It's the most sort of like historically accurate, if you really want to see like all the stuff, like all the weird stuff that they used to cook and really get a sense of like that way of life, then Farmer Boy house is for you.
I'm gonna have to revisit that. I think.
Yeah. And and they had these big barns, and so they reconstructed the barns, and like I think if you're really into horses too, Farmer Boy is a cool book too. So.
Yeah, and who wasn't into horses?
I know,
as a young lady.
Yeah.
I didn't mind it as much as a kid. Was there a big state fair scene? That might have been why. Yeah. I just liked the idea that they were working towards the state fair.
I know, yeah.
They had a goal. Yeah.
Yeah, and he gets a little pig.
Yeah.
And then there's a scene where he gives like they're making candy, they're making like taffy, and they make ice cream. Again, like it's the food,
Yeah.
And then they accidentally they give some of the pig like some candy, but then like the pig's mouth gets like shut, and it's really unhappy, so they have to chase down the pig. And it's really weird.
Actually, random question, but this reminds me. There probably isn't, but is there any picture, portrait, or painting of Jack, the brindle bulldog? Because I have a brindle bulldog, a Midwestern brindle bulldog.
Yeah.
And now I really want to see that.
Nobody's really quite sure about whether Jack was like an English bulldog or what kind of bulldog he was. But no, there isn't. And also, okay, real talk here. Do you know what happened to Jack the brindled bulldog?
Oh my, guys, I'm about to
No,
what happened?
Well, I mean, eventually he went to the happy hunting grounds.
Yes.
But actually he was traded with the horses after they left Kansas. He actually didn't go with them. They had other dogs. Laura was a dog lover, so like she was super into dogs.
Yeah.
So I think she just kind of combined all the dogs into Jack. But it was apparently a good thing because Jack wanted to be with. He wanted to be with the horses. I've had to explain this to kids actually when I do events. Because like
like explain it to me. How does that make sense? No, just kidding.
Yeah, no, his job was he was like trained with the horses, and so his job was to sort of keep the horses in line. So the horses were his friends. That's what I say to the kids. So it's like, when Padre had the horses, here's Jack. Jack goes along with him. So it sounds heartless, but
it was really best for Jack.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
At least he got to keep his friends, guys.
I know. But I think there is somewhere, I saw a blurry picture once of a dog that Laura had that they think Jack was based on. And it's some sort of bulldoggy dog.
Okay.
So.
But he was not a bulldog in the series.
No, really? What was he?
He was a mutt, kind of.
He was kind of like a sheepdoggy kind of thing.
Yeah.
There was also like another Little House on the Prairie. There was a Disney miniseries.
What?
Yes, which is a little bit more historically accurate, but maybe a little Jesus-y. Anyway, and then that dog was, I don't know, it was some sort of weird cattle dog or something like that. So I was like, just get us a bulldog.
Right.
That's what the audience wants.
Yeah.
The audience being Ines.
Yeah, pretty much. So now that we've debunked a myth of Jack the Brindle Bulldog, in your travels, what's the biggest Laura myth that was debunked for you? Or how did your view of Laura shift?
Well, a lot of it in terms of just the space, just like I was saying, how the surveyor's house in the book seemed like this huge house, and then you go in and it's tiny. The big main room is like, the whole house is maybe like the size of that room, pointing to this room that you can't see. Podcast listeners. Sorry.
My living room, which is not super spacious.
Yeah. Yeah, think of that with like a pantry, a lean-to, and then an upstairs, and then that's it. And then like the dugout. I mean, they built like a replica of the dugout, and you went in, and that's like a freight elevator. I mean, it's
gosh.
like that's like I can't believe a whole family lived in this. So that definitely was a big sort of realignment. But also, like, I realized, and I think part of this was research too, realizing that they didn't really necessarily have a better life when they went out west. They kind of had it really good in Pepin, Wisconsin, and when they were in Little House in the Big Woods, and they had this idea. There was this idea that like, oh, they're going out west, they're going to have their own land, they're going to have a bet with the government and homestead, and they're going to have this free land. It's all going to be great. And it kind of wasn't. I mean, in the sense that, they were out where they depended on the railroads, and everyone was really, really hugely kind of misinformed, or they had this huge misconception of how the climate was like for agriculture, for farming. Everyone had the idea that it was going to be really, really great for farming, and they sort of had no idea that all their farming methods that they used back east just did not work out there. They never really kind of made it. I mean, they proved up on their homestead claim, but then after Laura and Almanzo got married, Ma and Pa and the remaining siblings, they moved to town. They just they built a house in town, and they'd had it with farming, and so that was definitely kind of busted, and it was interesting. I mean, I wouldn't say it was depressing, but that was a big sort of sobering moment, because I think we have so much sort of invested in that idea that like, oh, they did go west, and also they didn't really go west all the time. There was some backtracking. They were in Wisconsin, then they moved to Kansas, then they moved back to Wisconsin, then they moved to Minnesota, then they moved back to Iowa, and then they moved back to Minnesota. There was a lot of back and forth, and then you find out that they didn't always live on their own. They weren't always, living independently. They had to maybe depend on others a lot more, which isn't a big deal, but that was kind of the big narrative that Laura and Rose kind of put forth in the books.
Right. How about you, Kathy? Did anything change after this trip?
Only my love for Laura, which increased.
So what's your biggest? I'm sorry, not your biggest. What's your favorite book in the series?
I think it's By the Shores of Silver Lake, which
that.
is yeah. Well, it's okay. That's good because like I kind of feel like it's sort of nobody's favorite because Jack dies right away. And like look, it's a big wallop when you first start that book because like Mary's blind and everyone's sick, and then Jack dies and everything. What I like it is like everything in the first part of the series gets kind of like turned up on its end and just sort of like, okay, we're starting over, we're going someplace else, and I feel like it's the sort of kind of like the wildest one. It's when like Laura and her crazy cousin like ride the wild ponies and the house, and then the town is being built, and I feel like it's the most sort of like Wild Westy one, and so I kind of dig it for that. And it's also like kind of like the teenage book, and yeah, it's just super cool. And then I feel like this is blasphemy, but I'm not a huge fan of These Happy Golden Years.
That is my favorite.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right.
The debate begins
Yeah,
now.
debate. Yeah. I mean, it's fine. I will say the whole thing with Mrs. Brewster and the knife, and when she has to teach school out in the middle of nowhere in the cold shanty, and they've got the crazy frontier wife who hates her and stuff like that. That's super cool. But I feel like they're just sort of biding their time for when Laura and Almanzo get together. I don't know. Every time I sort of reread it, there's more sort of proto-libertarian speechifying.
Well, I have to reread it then.
Yeah.
Because I bet that would be more apparent to me now.
Yeah. It's so funny because like once you start, as an adult, once you start sort of looking for it, like anytime Mr. Edwards, who was in Little House on the Prairie, and legit, he was a friend of theirs when, they lived in Kansas, but they didn't see him after that in real life, but they kind of have him show up like throughout the books. He's like, oh, he's sort of stopping through, so they sort of have him show up, and every time he does, like a libertarian speech comes out of his mouth. So, he's like this little mouthpiece, and you're like, oh, but here's Mr. Edwards.
Rose is like, let me tweak this a little bit for you, Mom.
Yeah, and he's like, how's it going? That dadgad government,
coming to take my land.
Yeah.
I also like the first 4 years, even though you said it was the dark book.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I was a dark child. And I was like, this is where the real life happens. Even though Little House is pretty dark overall, considering what they go through. And I loved Little House in the Big Woods. My favorite scene is when Laura meets her cousin, who's also named Laura, and they get into a fight because they both have baby siblings, and Laura is like, Carrie is the most beautiful baby. And the other little girl's like, no, that's not true. Our baby is the most beautiful. I just like that. That must have been like when she was 4 or 5, but I just like that sense of drama and family loyalty. Yeah. Shades of things to come.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm same. By the Shores of Silver Lake and Little Town on the Prairie. I love.
I love that one too.
Yeah. Especially because I think that's when Nellie Olson's bitchiness is like in full force, because when now she's a teenager.
She comes back.
Yeah, she comes back
with a vengeance.
Yeah. And I think in terms of the ones I disliked the most, the first 4 years was really hard. I don't know if I disliked it.
Yeah.
But it was hard to get through because it does have such a different tone that I was very confused while I was reading it. I read it like way later after I read all the rest, and I kept asking myself, did Laura write this? Did someone else write this? Is this a ghostwriter? And that was distracting.
Yeah. Because they're not sure. I mean, it wasn't really meant to be one of the Little House books. There's a theory that she actually sort of meant it to be an adult book. Oh. And but after Rose died in the late 60s, the editor at Harper was like, oh, here's this manuscript. Oh, okay.
Something. Yeah. Yeah, and I remember thinking that The Long Winter was a slog, but I hate winter, so maybe it had its intended effect. Yeah. Like, I felt the claustrophobia as I read that book. Yeah.
Is that the one where Almanzo and my bae, Cap Garland, save the day with their sleigh ride to get supplies for the town?
They go to get the seed wheat.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. I'm going to post a picture of Cap Garland, like, he was hot.
We should do a poll.
Yes, we're doing it.
Who would you rather?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, what's next for you? Do you have any other research or book projects in the works?
I've been working for a few years on a big project, and I don't really know quite what it's going to be yet, except that it deals with family history in some way. And so it's a weird kind of transition, because I sort of went from looking at all these old pictures of like Laura Ingalls Wilder and the Ingalls family, and also sort of realizing like, I don't know all this stuff, I don't know about my own family going back. And then I actually like 2 years later came across like a huge stash of old family photos and papers and stuff, and no one else can organize it besides me, apparently. I don't know. It was all up to me. And so I've been sorting through all this stuff, and it's been kind of overwhelming, but also I think there is a story about my family in there somewhere.
Ooh, yay.
Yeah. And where can people keep up with you in terms of social
okay.
medias?
Well, I have my Instagram, and let's see, I think probably the big central place is just wendymcclure.net, my website. And I am trying to, one of these days I'll update my Tumblr again, but but everything is on there, so.
Awesome.
Well, thank you. This has been my favorite interview so far.
I have never seen Kathy so happy, guys. No, this was awesome. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with us your experience, and you too, Kathy, for telling us about your side.
I know, and I don't think it's any mistake in fate that Wendy lives down the street from me. Like, meant to be.
So, if you like this episode and want to hear more, please subscribe to us on iTunes. You can find us on Podbean, Stitcher, and other places where podcasts are found. We're on Facebook, XX Will Travel, Twitter and Instagram at XX Will Travel. And check out our website, xxwilltravel.com, for any updates, including sign-ups to our newsletter, which are full of travel tips and fun little tidbits from our own travels. Until then, go forth and travel.